go up here.
Let's put it, this one a little bit lower, it's pretty sensitive. And now this one a little bit higher.
They've introduced my topic real well. I'm going to talk about drought management, and I was looking at a drought monitor this morning, and your historic rainfall for the state, and the drought was worse down as you went south and east, and pretty significant. I looked at a few months back spring. You only got 1 inch. I don't have to tell you. You remember well, I'm sure. But what Chris has covered has really introduced this topic real well because he's talking about grazing management, and that comes first. And if we're going to talk through all the steps, you got to prepare for drought. We know dry times are coming. And then what do we do once we have a drought and after the drought? Let's see if I can get her going here. Go the other way. Which one is it, Chris? Let's
see here.
I was hitting that one.
Yeah.
There we go. First off, I wanted to mention a grant that Terry mentioned there, and I've got a grant, and it's through Roane County. They're managing this grant, and it's a mentorship for beginning and underserved farmers. And a beginning farmer can be any age, but they hadn't filed a Schedule F for more than 10 years. So that they're part of it. And then the historically underserved could be veterans, minorities, I guess any others that fit that criteria. But the mentorship program is where you work with a farmer, and we've got 4 farmers across the state. Terry's one of them. Mike McElroy, some of you know, up in Greenville, he's going to serve as one. And then I'm one I'm near Macon County, Tennessee. I'm in Scottsville, Kentucky. And then there's one in West Tennessee, Brad Buttry. He's near UT Martin, Weakley County. But also part of it is I can go to farm visits, no charge. Can also go on farm visits for others that aren't historically underserved or beginning, but be a charge on those. And then we can do so many, I forget the number, but we can do several pasture walks and field days, and we can pay up to $1,000 for those events. So if you're interested in any of this, get with your soil conservation district or NRCS, or you can just contact Roane County or me. And this is for Tennessee and Kentucky, not other states. So overview, like I say, we're going to prep for drought. Timing, Chris covered it, Russ covered it. It's very important. Like I mowed some areas. I've got 180 acres that just came out of CRP. It's been equivalent of being in trees, even though I didn't plant them. They just came up because the way you have to manage CRP and you can't graze it. Anyway, I mowed some of it in August, and where I mowed, cheat came up. Where I didn't mow, there's nothing. I mean, it's just brown stems. So by mowing strategically, I released that cheat, which is beneficial. It's better than nothing. It's not the best. It's not a high-producing grass, but at least it's grass. The other land has goldenrod and ragweed stems and just old stemmy stuff and tree type stuff. We're going to cover what are the positive things about drought. Not many positive, but there is a few. And then the negative. And then what would we cull in cattle to adjust our carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is based on your management. Like Russ carries, his carrying capacity doubled because his management improved. So that we're going to cover a little bit on that, but not much. And then what to do after the drought, and then water management, and then hay becomes important during a drought. So, yeah, so what are we going to do? That's a sacrifice area on my place, and it's a holding area that you would go to once everything gets grazed down to, I'd like for us to stop grazing at 3 inches, but even if you take it to 2 inches, like Chris's studies have shown, you know, there's still some carbohydrate storage there, and it's going to bounce back. But 3 inches, if you want to see a miracle, leave a little more height. Every inch of grass is about 300 pounds of forage. So once we get down to that 3 inches, you're only going to get, if you take it to 2, you're only going to get 300 pounds more grazing it. It's not worth getting. That's a third of a roll of hay if we call it 1,000 pounds. That's not much grass. So leave some height. That leaf area is very important. And we're going to see that right here. This is another University of Kentucky study, and I've shown this a bunch over the years, hadn't shown it in a few years, but it really hits home. So this is looking at the height, clipping height in this case, but it could be grazing height, and then the fertilizer that was put with it. And we're looking at a 1/2 inch versus 4 inches with no fertilizer. So you can see it's very evident that the leaf area is very important. And then when you fertilize the low height, you get more weeds. When you fertilize the taller height, 4 inches, then you get less weeds. So even when to get a response from fertilizer, you need to have some height there, some leaf area. This is looking at all of them with fertilizer, and again, you see the response was higher. This is looking at stand persistence, and it'll last 80% longer by just managing the height. Another study that they did, and I'm just jumped to the slide after 6 days of regrowth. The one on the left was clipped every week, and Chris, you correct me if I'm off on any of this, but it was clipped every week for a month. So it's just for a month. That's how they were treated different. And then the one on the right was clipped to 3.5 inches, and then they were it was, once a month it was at 3.5. Then they were clipped to 3.5, they clipped to 1 inch, and then they let the regrowth happen. And this is like 6 days after the regrowth. So you see the response from just managing height. It's super important. Another one from Missouri, and it's saying if we graze to 2 inches, it takes 64 days to grow a ton of grass. If we graze to 4 inches, it only took 40 days to grow a ton of grass. That's a 37.5% increase in production just by managing the height. So, you know, how many paddocks do you need? Of course, us grazing managers, we want you to have 45 plus paddocks. I mean, we want you to have a lot of paddocks. They can be temporary wire, but if you just have 5 paddocks, you could do a weekly rotation and kind of get by. It's going to be okay, better than most, but it's not going to be drought management. It's just a real super minimum. Really, you ought to, for a weekly rotation, you ought to have 10 paddocks. Again, it can be polywire. You could have 5 permanents and divide them in half. You got your 10 paddocks. But to really get into the drought management, you really ought to end up, I've got 16, well, I did have 16 paddocks, and then I would divide them up and I'd have 45 or more paddocks. And that was for a 1 to 3 day rotation. That works really good. So stockpiling forage, you know, we're always talking about fall and comes up pretty often. What is stockpiling? Well, it's just a reserve paddock that you didn't graze and you set it aside for when you know you're going to need some grass, and that's winter and drought. You can stockpile anything, manage what you have. Chris talked about that. But tall fescue holds up better than anything else because it's got a thick cuticle on it and just is stiff and upright, holds up well. So I like to have a 60 to 90 day paddock that's been rest for 60 to 90 days at all times. Not every field's rest that long, and on average it's 45 days. But, in the spring it could be 14 days on some of them, but have a few, and don't have to do the whole farm. Let's just say you're beginning and you haven't done a lot of this, then just set aside one field. It could be a 3-acre field. Let it rest about 60 days, 90 days, and this is in the growing season. Now in the fall, you can let it sit there for 210 days, all the way till March, and it'll be better than you're not feeding as much hay and all. So here's kind of the target. I don't want too much brown grass shading green grass. Again, that solar panel, we want to capture that sunlight and get the regrowth. But it'd be great to always have a paddock like this. Now if those leaves start turning yellow, we need to graze that one, and another one, the one that's been rest 60 days, becomes the 90-day rest. So just do some of that. I like to dig down through those leaves and look at the soil and look at the stem density. As you graze taller, your stem density the plant density will spread out. So every once in a while, Chris and I were talking about this morning, you want to graze just a little lower. It could be 6 inches. Get some light down in there so that the plants don't get too far apart. Terry, we've looked at it on your place. You're doing a great job, but we don't want to rest too long and not. But here's what I want to see down there on the ground is I want to see it tilled up because the soil life are so active. So dig down, look at the soil, and see what's going on. I'd really like to see more residue there. The soil life are so active, they've eaten up all the residue. But to bring this up to a new level, more residue needs to be returned to the ground. There's a lot of moisture under that tall grass, and that's keeping everything going. The whole system the ecology is working. The soil is habitat for soil life, and a lot of people say, manage the underground herd as well as the above ground herd. So what's the prep for drought? Of course, manage that grazing height. Confine stock when you're down to the minimum heights. Stock according to your management. I know several people that year-round graze, not that many, but a few, and Russ, you're real close to it and maybe going to be there this year. But a lot of them, now you're stocked pretty high, but you're doing that multiple day rotation, and you need to remember that. But if you're just rotating once or 3 times a day, then you need to be about 4 acres per animal unit unless you're on top high production soils. That's at about a 3-ton production yield. It takes about 4 acres per cow if you're rotating 1 to 3 days. Maintaining the fertility. I hadn't fertilized in 16 years, but the caveat that's very important is the soil fertility is still balanced because 80 to 90% of the manure and urine is covering the land through that 1 to 3 day rotation, and it's just sustaining the fertility. Stockpiling the forages, talked about the paddocks. We want some tillers out there. We'd like to have, and tiller diameter is a very important thing to look at. If you're digging through there and look at the stem diameter, the bigger it is, if it's, I guess it's about a 1/16 of an inch, 1/4 inch, I'd like to see them 1/4 inch diameter to really be a healthy, vigorous stand. Buy hay, like to have 50% hay even at the end of winter just to be ready for those hard times. What's good about the drought? Well, the ground's firm, but one thing is in dry country, they get more dry matter per bite. Performance can go up at the beginning of a drought because they're getting more energy in every bite. Another thing it does, it shuts down the cool seasons, and here you can release the warm seasons. And I know some of you have been around a while and have seen this, the cool seasons get shut down, here comes the warm season. As soon as we get a rain, everything's booming again. And I think you went through that this year because I was looking at that rainfall data, and you got June and July rains, and that should have released a lot of crabgrass. Yeah, so what do we do during the drought? The first thing is start shutting gates. They're not going to get anything out there anyway. They're just compacting the land and overgrazing every little bit of growth. So go ahead and confine them down on those low fertility areas or weedy areas, and feed hay. Graze those odd areas. That's where polywires really excels, is graze around the headquarters, anything that's odd. And then hayfield's not going to yield anything. Don't take it too low, but go ahead and graze what's there. Anyway, look for those opportunities. Here's my culling order. If I was culling cows, of course, open cows, go ahead and preg test. You know, you can do a blood test through the tail and getting blood and decide what's open. The poor doing calf, it's time to get rid of these just that are not as productive. Russ has good data on which ones are not weaning 50% of mother's weight. Bad feed, in a grazing operation, we need good feed on these animals. A late calf, bad udder. The udder should be level, not tilted. So these are no balloon teats. We just need, it's a good time to get rid of those. And then if you want to wean early, in general, I don't wean till 10 months of age, whatever floats your boat. But the rumen's not active in these calves till they're about 300 pounds. So that's as early as I'd want to wean. And then keep the heifers, like let's say it's a terrible drought. In this area, I don't call them droughts because out west, they have severe droughts. I mean, years of drought. But if it went on and on, you just keep your heifers. And if you're a multi-species grazer, you just keep the goats because they can live on very little water and they can live on browse, of course. So what about shade? It comes up a lot. You know, how important is it? And of course, in dry times, it's more important. And I like this heat humidity index. This one's from the Noble Foundation, I believe. Yep. And it's basically, the way I remember it, is 80% humidity and 80 degrees. Anything above that, they need shade. That's my simple way of remembering it. A Missouri study showed that cattle on endophyte infected fescue with shade gained 0.72 more per day than without. Artificial shade, like the shade havens, and I've got a picture of one, they gain 20% more than no shade. But with tree shade, they gain 60% more. There's a shade haven. I don't know if I've got Lauren's name spelled right there. Those need to be moved daily, really, because it's quite an impact, and try to park them on undesirable plant areas. There's some, that's on my place, and that's some chestnuts, and this is the best way. I've done several tree plantings, and this is my this is what I'm going to use from now on. It's a tree tube. That's a Tubex now. It's changed to something like Plantra, I think, has taken over the tree tube industry. And then there's a timeless fence post. But anyway, the tree is planted about 1.5 feet, 2 foot off of a permanent fence, and then it's got this, I just used polywire, probably should have just used a high tensile wire because it's just staying up all the time. So the sheep can go under, but the cattle can't get to the trees. Cattle, especially lice, you know, they want to rub on everything. So that's when they really get at them. But it's worked real well, this particular setup. And you can plant a number of things. One I'm excited about is persimmons, Russ. I think it's really got some potential. And then I have some, that's my walnut silver pasture, and that they just volunteered. And of course I thinned them and all. In tree management, we really only need 25 to 30%, 35% shade to grow grass. Most people have way too many trees, so it's not that hard. To get 50% light, you only need like 7 trees per acre when they're mature. So it's not that many trees. So space them out. In this case, I could get by because they were already established. In general, in established trees, you want them at least 15 foot tall. And walnuts aren't desired by cattle in general anyway. Beaver don't even eat walnuts. Another tree that beaver don't typically eat, now they'll eat a walnut or if they don't have anything else to eat, but is cypress, bald cypress. And they don't eat dogwoods very well. They love willow. Talking about beaver there. I digress. But bale grazing, this is in winter, but in a drought it could be used too, and it's just a good way to get that manure and urine distribution and get some benefits on the landscape. Because feeding hay, you're adding more biomass. I believe it's 200,000 pounds to equal one. You need 200,000 pounds of biomass to get 1% organic matter. So it takes usually about 10 years. I probably should have looked at these numbers again before I presented them, but that's about right, I believe. And every 1% organic matter releases about 25 pounds of nitrogen, so 4% organic matter is our target. But anyway, this is one technique you can use. And should you reseed those hay feeding areas or not? A lot of times they'll volunteer and you don't need to. One thing I'm kind of excited about this spring, and I bet it's true here, after a drought, then the vegetation's been knocked back and it can be a clover year. And I'm seeing it at home. The clover right now is a great time to inventory your fields, see if that clover is there. And the way I plan to manage that is I'm going to back off, lock them down or whatever. Back off for now, let that clover get established, but then there's going to be a point, just like Chris mentioned, I'm going to need to graze it to keep light to the clover. You see what I mean? Because the grass is going to come too, and that'll probably be April. Yeah, and we get excited when we get green up, in the spring, but really we don't get growth until something like the first week of April. So don't get too excited and start too early. And you're setting yourself up for the whole year when you start grazing. So try to delay grazing. If you just feed 1 week longer than usual, assuming that you've been turning out early. So I'm not going to run through all these numbers, but by seeding those areas, it only costs about $200 per acre, and then the value in fertilizer from the hay and the manure and all is about $3,000. So that's 15 times more the value on those areas. So what if you're overstocked and overgrazed? What are the options? And so this is after the drought. Again, that timing is very important. Whether you're seeding anything or not, it's an important time to do a disturbance if you want to release the native seed bank. And disturbance can be grazing. And these are the end of the seeding dates for the Tennessee area. This is that honeycomb freeze that Chris mentioned. This is what I really want to see when I'm seeding legumes. Predicted right now, I think next week we're going to get some 28s and things like that. So, time is of the essence if you're going to frost seed. Now you could harrow and seed anytime through March and be pretty good. That's a herd seeder. I really like those. They're just electric seeder. Chris was showing some options for that. The old saying, Joe Burns from years ago, some of you remember Joe, was 248 renovate, and talking about 2 pounds of white, 4 pounds of red, and 8 pounds of annual Lespedeza. And usually the annual Lespedeza is just on the lower production type lands. And annual Lespedeza can be with crabgrass too. I'm looking at doing some of that on that crepe ground, crabgrass and annual Lespedeza. And then there's some soil health options. You can get crazy and start adding all kinds of diversity, but you can see those are pretty low seeding rates in the diversity there. So forage quality, Chris covered that well, so I'm not going to get too much into that. I intentionally put that ragweed leaf in there because it's high quality too, and when you have sheep and goats, they'll eat it real well. Cattle, not so much, but if it's low and vegetative, they can. Seeding options. So what are we going to do? Here we are. It's our kind of our first opportunity after the drought. We didn't have a great fall either for seeding. So do nothing is always an option. It could be like on my crepe ground where I haven't mown yet. I'm going to at least mow it before the end of March because I want to release something, get something vegetative going. Unrolling hay, that can be a source of seed, good or bad. And then you could seed, if we're really excited and really want a high quality, we could seed oats and turnips or peas. And it looks very attractive, and I look at it every year, but is it worth doing? Probably not, because the season's going to be short, and we're going to get a glut of growth anyway in April and May. So my tendency is let's delay and plant a warm season. The earliest warm season you can plant is Sudan grass. It's more cold tolerant, and you could plant it as early as April 20th, something like that. You could even plant corn and graze it. I have planted bin run corn, but you need pretty high fertility. You're probably going to need to fertilize unless you're at a high organic matter. Then you could probably get by with just corn. It's probably one of the cheapest things you could plant to graze. We could, if it's a clean land, we could go ahead and plant some native warm season, or you could plant Bermuda. Just know you're going to need some fertility to go with that Bermuda grass. And then we need to wait till fall if we're going to be planting orchard grass fescue. You could plant it now. It might work. Definitely need to get it in earlier. The later you plant, then the more weeds we're going to have in there. And crabgrass is one of the big problems with spring planted cool seasons. So here's looking at some options. Right now would be the spring oats and turnips or spring peas. And then Sudan's our next option. And then crabgrass and pearl millet. We could throw some annual Lespedeza in there, which I would. And then in the fall, August or so, we could again go with the spring oats, or ryegrass and cereal rye is another good option. If you plant into fescue, normally here's the break point in my mind. If we have 50% or less of our fescue existing out there, then it's time to renovate and do something. It's whatever option you decide to go with. And if we plant annuals in that, we've got to manage to keep some light to it because they can be a smother crop, and the perennials may decrease even more. But if you've already given up on it, it might be a good way to go. So forage diversity, Russ mentioned the warm seasons, the natives, so that's a good drought plan there. And they could be in the same field normally, as Chris mentioned. Bermuda grass and fescue are a great option that will give you probably more grazing days than you'll get on any other field. And he talked about how to manage that, and I'm real pleased that you did. I think that's a wonderful way. It takes a little more management to manage something like that because one can dominate, and you probably need to keep that from happening. I'm not going to go through all these, but forage diversity can be important in that it spreads out our growth and our root structures and all. If you want a smother mix, then something like vetch and peas are wonderful. I've seen buttercup and poison hemlock, all kinds of plants smothered out just by managing more cover out there. Just delay grazing. And annuals are the easiest weed to control because if you have cover when they germinate, they're not going to amount to anything. So you got to, again, dig down that grass and look at when those plants are coming up. One of my worst weeds is Perella mint, and it comes up in, I guess, late March or early April. So I've got to keep cover on that to keep that from just being all over the farm. So water management, that picture's from Cades Cove area, I think. But one thing, just looking at the picture, is animals like still water better than running water. So if you're giving them a limited access, then you may want to think about that. Bigger troughs are important, especially with limited water, like a solar pump. You want to pump to a big tank and then gravity flow from there. Big tire tanks, they're storing water. If your pressure's low on top of a hill, you may want bigger tanks than small. Let's see, yeah, limited water. Think about when the water's available. Some people have springs that go dry. They may want to graze that field in the early spring, and that way they know that they're going to get to use it when they have water. Can always back graze to a field, but if it's stockpiled, you don't want it too rank and all because they won't go there and graze it very well. So it needs to be higher quality than the field they're back grazing in order to get them to utilize that field at a distance. Above ground pipeline, I'm not a big advocate of that. I feel like I know pretty well where the water line needs to be, so I would go ahead and put it underground unless it's rented ground. And then again, goats need very little water. This is a farm that had limited water source, and you can see that it was being overused, and ponds fill in normally from the edge of the pond. And there's just a lot of sloughing and all that comes into that, but that's just a sign that he needs more water. And we can pump out of that pond and take water to the rest of the farm. This is this is not on Drought so much, but it's a bubbler, and he got that. He got it at Bass Pro Shop, and it's just a fish tank bubbler. Put it in the trough, and it bubbles off of the solar and keeps it from freezing. Russ, you going to get into some of that stuff this afternoon? Yeah, Russ has done a lot of creative techniques. So summary: be observant. You know, look at your forage and soil and see what's going on. Try to keep that 60-day plus hay supply. The sacrifice area is important, and the sacrifice area needs to be an area that doesn't have drainage ways in it or streams in it, has a little bit of shade if it's needed, and don't use it until those hard times. Save it and keep it available. Cull those livestock, and normal culling is recommended to be 10 to 20% per year. So you got to go beyond that if you're in a drought. Manage what you have. Can't say that enough. Just manage that, and then reseed if you need to. We have a grazing school coming up in Wilson County, and it's open to everybody. It's going to be on the Neal Brothers farm, and Perry Neal's been here and spoke before. So that's coming up in May. And then I have the pasture walk in October. It's October 17th. And there's some contact information. So I guess any time for questions, Terry?
Pretty short.
Pretty short. Keeping you from lunch. Any questions for anything? All righty.